Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. So as you all are all aware of, we are discussing about the central nervous system, in which we were talking about the brain. The brain, as we have seen, that it is divided into four main parts, that is the brain stem, the cerebellum, the diencephalon and the cerebrum. So we shall discuss about the cerebrum in this particular video. Okay, so cerebrum, it is considered as the seat of intelligence. Okay, now we have considered rest of the parts, but we have seen that most of them act as the relay station for transmitting the information between the higher centers. Okay, so cerebrum is considered as the highest center of the brain and the spinal cord or the periphery. Okay, so most of it comprise of the nuclei, wherein synapsing will take place and the information will be transmitted. Next order neuron will originate and it will transmit some information to the higher center, that is the cerebrum. Okay, so here the processing will take place. So most of the integrative function, it is carried out by the cerebrum, and to certain extent the other parts also, but this is the main part of the brain which is associated with the integrative function. So this is the area of brain which provides us with the ability to read, to write, to speak. Okay, so all these are possible because of the cerebrum. So it helps us to make the calculations, compose the music, even we can recall or remember what has happened in the past. Correct? You can recall what I have covered in the earlier lectures. So you can remember what has happened in the past. Even you can plan for the future. So what you are supposed to do in future, that also you can plan. So that's because of the cerebrum. And imagine some certain things. So your imagination, that is your brain can, it can prepare a particular situation, okay, existence of something which has never happened. So you can imagine things, right? So that's all possible because of the cerebrum. Okay, so this particular part of brain, it mainly comprises of three parts. Okay, that is the outermost layer, that's called as the cerebral cortex. So it's generally the gray matter which make up the cerebral cortex. Within the cerebral cortex is present the white matter, the cerebral white matter. Okay, so obviously what will be the white matter? That will be the myelinated neurons, right? White matter. Apart from this, even there will be presence of the gray matter. So this mainly comprises of the nuclei. So a number of nuclei will be present within the white matter. Okay, so outer portion, that is the cerebral cortex, this one. So that's mainly the gray matter. Then comes the white matter and within the white matter is interspersed certain grey matter nuclei. So what are nuclei? Can you recall what a nuclei is or what a nucleus is? Yes, it is the group of cell bodies. Now where these are located? A group of cell bodies may be also present in the PNS, right? So the group of cell bodies in the CNS, these are present in the CNS, that's why these are called as nuclei. Can you all recall what are these cell bodies in the PNS called as? Yes, what are they known as? So the cell bodies in the PNS, these are known as ganglia. Correct? So, to start with the outermost part of the cerebrum, that is the cerebral cortex. Now cortex, the meaning of this word is rind or bark. You all must have seen the bark of a tree, right? The outermost layer, which is almost brown in color. Okay, so since this particular part, cerebral cortex, it forms the outermost covering or the outermost layer. Okay, as you can see, this one. Okay, so that's the gray matter, correct? This one, and within the gray matter lies the white matter, correct? So this outer layer of the gray matter, that is the cerebral cortex. So since it is forming an outer covering, it is known as cortex, means a bark or a rind. And this is round about 2 to 4 mm in thickness. Now though it comprises of very much small area, still it comprises of billions of neurons which are arranged in the layers. Okay, now as you can see that the cerebral cortex, it has a number of folds, as you can see, right? So as you can see over here that there are folds, right? Now why these folds appear in the cerebral cortex, why it happens? That's because during the embryonic development, the brain size increases very rapidly. Now because of this rapid increase in the size of the brain, the grey matter which is present in the cortex, it enlarges much faster than the white matter which is present within it. So the grey matter grows very fast. Now because of this, the cortical region, it rolls and folds on itself, as you can see over here. So it has folded on itself, right? The grey matter. That's because the growth is taking place very fast. Now these folds which are formed, these are the ones. Okay, so the folds which are formed on the surface, as you can see in this particular picture, a lot of folds you can see, right? So these folds are called as gyri, means circles. A single fold is known as the gyrus, or these are known as convolutions, the folds of the cerebral cortex, which are formed due to the faster rate of growth of the grey matter. Okay, so these folds, they form several grooves on the surface of the brain, right? So as you can see the surface, there are a lot of folds which are present, correct? So these folds, the region in between the grooves, these are known as the fissures. Okay. Now the shallower grooves, as you can see that certain grooves are deep, right? As you can see this one, this is quite deep, right? This particular fissure. But this one, it is quite shallow, right? Even this one. So these are shallow grooves, right? So these shallow grooves, they are known as sulci. Okay, means grooves. Singular, that is one such groove, it is known as sulcus. So these grooves which are present in the cerebral cortex, these are named according to their location. Okay, now the most prominent fissure, that is this one, the one which is present along the midline of the brain, correct? So this particular fissure which is present, this is the most prominent fissure. Okay, that's the one which is present at the central part. So this particular fissure, it is known as the longitudinal fissure. So this particular fissure separates the cerebrum into two halves known as the cerebral hemispheres. So there are two hemispheres into which the cerebrum is divided into. So there are two equal halves. Okay, so these are known as cerebral hemispheres. So there is a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And this particular division is made by this longitudinal fissure. Now within the longitudinal fissure, in between the two hemispheres, lie the flex cerebri. Can you recall what this flex cerebri is? Yes? Flex cerebri, that's the part of the or the extension of the dura mater. The protective layer, if you can remember the dura mater, so it has certain extensions which pass within the cerebrum. So one such extension is flex cerebri. Remember, that's the one which divides the cerebrum into two halves. Okay, so along this longitudinal fissure in between the two hemispheres is this extension of the dura mater which separates the two hemispheres. Okay, now these two hemispheres, these are connected by a structure called as the corpus callosum. So these two cerebral hemispheres, they are connected by a band. Okay, and that is this one, corpus callosum. So at this particular region, the two hemispheres are connected to each other. Now exact meaning of this particular term is corpus means body and callosum means heart. So hard body. So that's a broad band of white matter which contains the axons which are extending in between the two hemispheres. So these are connecting in between the two hemispheres. Okay. So this is to do with the basic structural organization of the cerebrum, that is the cerebral cortex. Now coming to the lobes of the cerebrum. Okay, now the cerebrum, it is broadly divided into 4 lobes. Now these 4 lobes, these are named according to the bones of the cranium. If you can recall that the cranium, which is enclosing your brain, it has several parts, right? So these include the frontal bone, parietal bone, temporal bone and occipital bone. So the area of the cerebrum which is just located beneath that particular bone, it is given the name of that particular bone. If you can recall the cranium, the position of the different bones, frontal bone, that is located in the front area, right? Parietal just behind that, occipital is towards the posterior end, and the temporal bones, these are present towards your ears. So accordingly the hemispheres or the cerebrum is also divided into 4 lobes. That is the frontal lobe, this is the one, the parietal lobe, this is the one, the temporal lobe, this one, and the occipital lobe. Okay, now these lobes, these are separated from each other by the sulci, that is the grooves. The specific grooves, they separate these different lobes from each other. Okay, so there is a sulcus known as central sulcus, that's the one. Okay, so this central sulcus, so that's a groove which is actually separating the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, right? Okay, now these grooves are formed by the folds, right? Now there are certain gyri which are present. Okay, say for example this one, the precentral gyrus, that is, it's located over here, this one. So this particular fold which is just located anterior to this central sulcus, that's known as the precentral gyrus. So this particular gyrus, it mainly contains the primary motor area which gives the motor outputs. So the primary motor area of the cerebral cortex, of course we'll come to the functional organization of the cerebral cortex also in the next video. Okay, so the primary motor area, it's mainly located in this particular gyrus, precentral gyrus. There is one more major gyrus, that's the postcentral gyrus. So that will be present just posterior to the central sulcus. So that's known as posterior or postcentral gyrus. Now this particular gyrus, it mainly contains the primary somatosensory area. So sensory functions or the sensory impulses which are arising from the somatic regions, these are processed in this particular area of the cerebral cortex, that is the postcentral gyrus. Then there is one more sulcus, that is the lateral cerebral sulcus or fissure as it is known as. So that's located over here, that's the one. So this lateral cerebral sulcus, this is separating which 2 lobes? So that's separating the frontal and the temporal lobe. Then there is one more sulcus, that is the parieto-occipital sulcus. That's the one. So this particular groove, it is mainly separating the, as the name implies very clearly, it is separating the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. Okay. So these are the main sulci which are separating several lobes of the cerebrum. Now there is one more part of the cerebrum, and that is known as the insula. That is insula, which is located over here, as you can see over here. Now this particular structure, it is projected to the surface. That means this part actually is present within the cerebrum. It's not visible. Okay, so it lies within the lateral cerebral sulcus, deeper to the parietal, frontal and the temporal lobes. And this particular picture, this particular part of the lobes have been cut open. The temporal lobe has been cut open to expose the insula, which lies at the central areas of the cerebrum. Okay. Now coming to the cerebral white matter. So the outermost covering, it is known as the cerebral cortex, and it's mainly made up of the grey matter. Now within this cerebral cortex lies the white matter. So white matter, it will mainly be comprised of the myelinated axons, right? So it's mainly comprised of the myelinated axons. So these myelinated axons, they will form the tracts, right? So a group of axons within the CNS, these are called as tracts, right? So these are the group of axons in the CNS. Now what are the groups of axons in the PNS known as? Yes, these are known as the nerves. The spinal nerves and the cranial nerves are present. Okay, so within the CNS, these are called as the tracts. So there are three main tracts which are present in the CNS. Okay, so that is the association tract. Okay, now association tracts, these are the ones. So these conduct the nerve impulses between the gyri in the same hemisphere. That's very important. So within the same hemisphere, now what is a gyrus? That's the folds, right? The folds which are present. So the nerve impulses are carried in between these gyri within the same hemisphere. There are two hemispheres, right? Right and the left. So within this same hemisphere, the impulses are carried in between these gyri. Then the second type of tract is known as the commissural tracts. Okay, so commissural tracts, these are the ones, and this one. Okay, so they conduct the nerve impulses from the gyri of one hemisphere to the corresponding gyri in the other hemisphere. Okay, that is a particular gyri, say for example in the right hemisphere. So it will conduct the nerve impulses to the corresponding gyri in the other hemisphere, that is in the left one. Now these commissural tracts, these are in the form of three groups, that is the corpus callosum. Now where is the corpus callosum? Yes, that's one. So that's a part of commissural tract, right? So what is the corpus callosum? It forms the connections between the two hemispheres, right? Apart from this, there is anterior commissure over here, and there, similarly there is a posterior commissure in the posterior sides of the hemispheres. Then the third type of tract is known as the projection tracts. Okay, now projection tracts, these again will comprise of the axons. So this is the one, projection tracts. So they also comprise of the group of axons which conduct the impulse from the cerebrum to the lower parts of the CNS. That is, say for example, the thalamus, brainstem or the spinal cord. Or they may carry the impulses from the lower parts of the CNS towards the cerebrum. So either way they will send impulses for the communication. Say for example, the internal capsule, that's the example of projection tracts. As you can see over here, the tracts, so these carry the impulses in between the higher centers and the lower centers, that is from the cerebrum to the other parts of the CNS, and the reverse direction also. So they will contain both the ascending as well as descending axons, that is the sensory as well as the motor axons will be present in the internal capsule. So it is to do with the white matter. Now coming to the next part, that is the basal nuclei. So this basal nuclei, it is present deep within the cerebral hemisphere. As you can see that these are the two hemispheres, right? That's the one, and this is the one. The two hemispheres which are divided into halves by this longitudinal fissure, as you can see, the deep fissure. Okay. Now within the cerebral cortex, which is the outermost covering, it is made up of the grey matter. Within that is present the white matter. Now within these white matter again are present several nuclei. Now basically these can be divided into three groups. So these nuclei, they are collectively known as basal nuclei. Now these basal nuclei have been referred to as basal ganglia. You will find in certain books this term basal ganglia. But is it appropriate to use this term ganglia as far as CNS is concerned? What is a ganglia? That's the group of cell bodies. But where? That's present in the PNS. But we are talking about the CNS, right? So is it appropriate to use this particular term? The group of cell bodies within the CNS, these are actually known as the nuclei, right? So this is actually a misnomer. You cannot use this particular term as far as CNS is concerned. So it is actually the basal nuclei, but some of the literature still is using that particular term. Okay. Now, coming to the basal nuclei, let us see what are those three nuclei which are present within the basal nuclei. So which are these nuclei? So two of the basal nuclei, these are present side by side, just lateral to the thalamus. Now what is thalamus? Yes, that's the part of, we have seen in the last video, diencephalon, right? That's the part of diencephalon, thalamus, hypothalamus and epithalamus. These are the parts of the diencephalon. Okay, so just lateral to this thalamus is present the basal nuclei. So that's your thalamus on either sides. So just lateral to that are located the two of the basal nuclei. So as you can see over here, these. So these two nuclei, that is the globus pallidus and the putamen. So globus pallidus, the meaning of globus is ball and pallidus is pale, pale ball. So which is closer to the thalamus. And the next nucleus, that is putamen, the actual meaning of this word is shell. So this is mainly closer to the cerebral cortex. Okay. Now these two nuclei of the basal nuclei, these are the parts of the basal nuclei, right? So these two nuclei, that is globus pallidus and the putamen, together these two nuclei, these are referred to as lentiform nucleus, shaped like a lens. That's the meaning of lentiform. So the two nuclei, that is globus pallidus and the putamen, these are collectively referred to as this lentiform nucleus. And the third nucleus of the basal nuclei, which is a part of basal nuclei, is the caudate nucleus. Caud means tail. So this particular nucleus, it has three parts. So it comprises of the head, tail and the body. A long comma shaped body which connects the head and the tail. So as you can see over here, it is located here, caudate nucleus. Okay, so let's have a lateral look at it. So that's your caudate nucleus. That's the one. So as you can see the shape of this particular nucleus, it resembles a comma, right? So it has a head, body and the tapering part is called as the tail. Now together the lentiform and the caudate nuclei, the lentiform and the caudate nuclei, which are the parts of the basal nuclei, these are collectively known as corpus striatum. Corpus means body and striatum means striated body, which is having strip. Striations are the ones which are present on the muscles, if you can recall. The skeletal muscles and the cardiac muscles, these are striated in nature, right? So such kind of striations are appearing on these nuclei. Collectively these are called as corpus striatum. Now what is this lentiform? Lentiform nuclei, it is made up of the other two nuclei, right? That is the putamen and the globus pallidus. So these two make up the lentiform nuclei, and the third nucleus, that is the chordate nucleus. So collectively all these are known as corpus striatum. Okay, so that's because of the stripped appearance. As you can see in the picture, it's very clear over here. So there are striations, right? Okay, so these particular nuclei, that is the basal nuclei, these are functionally linked to the substantia nigra of the midbrain. Can you recall that? Substantia nigra, it's a part of the midbrain. And the subthalamic nuclei of the diencephalon. So these basal nuclei, these make connections with the midbrain and the diencephalon. Okay, so the axons of the substantia nigra, they terminate in the chordate nucleus and the putamen, and the subthalamic nuclei, they interconnect with the globus pallidus. Apart from this, there is one more part called as the claustrum. So that's a thin sheet of the grey matter which is situated lateral to the putamen, which is one of the basal nuclei. Okay, so these also are considered to be the part of the basal nuclei, and mainly these are involved in the visual attention. Okay, now coming to the functions of these basal nuclei. So these basal nuclei, they receive the input from the cerebral cortex, and they also provide output to the motor parts of the cortex. Okay, so via certain nuclei of the thalamus, they send the impulses and they also receive the impulses from the cerebral cortex. Apart from that, it also have extensive connections with each other also, these basal nuclei. So the major function of these basal nuclei is in regulating the initiation and termination of certain body movements. Apart from that, even the activities in the putamen, these will precede or it anticipates the body movements. The activities of the chordate nucleus, these occur prior to the eye movements, and the globus pallidus, this helps in regulation of the muscle tone that may be required for the specific body movements. Apart from that, the basal nuclei also help in controlling the subconscious contraction of certain skeletal muscle. Say for example, when you are walking, you automatically swing your arms, right, while you are walking. Or the true laughter for a particular joke. So if you enjoy it, you suddenly laugh aloud. Okay, so such kind of contractions of the skeletal muscles for such kind of activities, it is mediated by the basal nuclei. So all these are the motor functions, right? So that's the motor function. Apart from that, the basal nuclei, these also help in initiating and terminating certain cognitive processes such as paying attention, memory, or planning for something, even regulation of certain emotional behavior. This is also under the control of basal nuclei. The circuits between the basal nuclei and the limbic system. So in case if there is any dysfunction, it may precipitate the disorders like Parkinson's disease, the obsessive compulsive disorder, or the schizophrenia, or chronic anxiety. These are all the disorders associated with the CNS. So such kind of disorders may get precipitated. Now apart from this, there are certain areas which are present within the cerebrum, and that is collectively known as the limbic system. So the part which is encircling the brain stem and the corpus callosum, so it forms a ring-like structure on the inner border of the cerebrum and the floor of the diencephalon. So such structures collectively are referred to as limbic system. Limbic means border. So they encircle to form the border. So it comprises of several structures, that is a limbic lobe, dentate gyrus, amygdala, septal nuclei, mammillary bodies, the nuclei, olfactory bulbs. Then there are several structures such as fornix, stria terminalis, stria medullaris, the medial forebrain bundles, and the mammillothalamic tracts. Okay, so let us see one by one where exactly these are located. The first part, that is the limbic lobe. So that forms the rim of the cerebral cortex on the medial surface of each hemisphere. Now this limbic lobe, it comprises of the cingulate gyrus. Cingul means the belt, so it has a belt like appearance. Okay, so that's the one, cingulate gyrus. What is a gyrus? That's the fold, right? So it's one of the fold which is forming the internal rim of the cerebral cortex. So it lies just above the corpus callosum. Now where is the corpus callosum? That's the one. So as you can see, it is lying just above the corpus callosum. There is one more part of this limbic lobe, that is parahippocampal gyrus. So this is present in the temporal lobe. Okay, the parahippocampal gyrus, that fold, that's present in the temporal lobe. Okay, now there is one part called as hippocampus, means seahorse. So this is also the portion of parahippocampal gyrus. Now, hippocampus lies over here. That's also lying in the temporal lobe. So it extends into the floor of the lateral ventricles. Now the next part is the dentate gyrus. Dentate means toothed. So this lies in between these two regions, hippocampus and the parahippocampal gyrus. That is these two. Okay, so this is your parahippocampal gyrus and that's your hippocampus. So just in between these two parts lies one more gyrus, and that's known as dentate gyrus. And the next part is the amygdala. Amygdala means almond shape. So this particular structure, this one, in the shape of an almond. So this again comprises of several neurons which are located close to the tail of the caudate nucleus. Okay. Then the next part is the septal nuclei. Okay, the septal nuclei is present over here. So these are located within the septal area to form the regions under the corpus callosum and the paraterminal gyrus. Next one is the mammillary bodies. Now mammillary bodies are actually the part of hypothalamus. So these are two rounded masses. So these are also part of the limbic system. That's the one. So it's actually the part of hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, it's one of the part of the diencephalon, right, which comprises of a number of nuclei. So mammillary bodies is also form the part of the limbic system. Okay. Then two of the nuclei of the thalamus, that is anterior nucleus and the medial nucleus. These also form a part of limbic system. These are actually the part of the thalamus. These are the nuclei which are present in the thalamus, if you can recall. So these also form the part of the limbic system. Apart from that, one more part is the olfactory bulb. Okay, so olfactory bulb, this is the one. So that will be the part of olfactory pathway, right? Olfactory pathway is associated with what? That will carry the sensory impulses from the nose, right, for the sense of smell. So olfactory bulbs is a part of the olfactory pathway. So that's also the part of limbic system. Apart from that, there are several other structures. Fornix, okay, that's the one. Then the stria terminalis, this is the one. Then the stria medullaris, it's located over here. Then the medial forebrain bundles within the forebrain and the mammillothalamic tract. Mammillothalamic tract is located over here. So these are linked by the bundles of interconnected myelinated axons. Okay, now what is the role of this limbic system? So we have seen the composition of the limbic system, which encircles certain medial regions of the cerebrum. Now what are the functions of this limbic system? So usually this limbic system, collectively it is referred to as emotional brain. That's because mainly it plays a role in a range of emotions which are associated with the pain. So when you are in deep pain, you develop some emotions, right, some expressions, or pleasure, or the docility, that is when you're quiet, affection and anger. So these are some of the emotions, right, which can be expressed. So these are mainly carried out by the limbic system. Apart from that, it is also involved in the olfaction, that is sense of smell. Since olfactory bulb is also the part of limbic system, the memory, that's also involved as one of the function of the limbic system. Now certain experiments which have been carried out in the animals, by stimulating certain areas of the limbic system, it arises definite type of emotions in that particular animal. Okay, so certain areas when they are stimulated, this will produce the emotions which may be associated with intense pain or extreme pleasure, or by stimulating certain areas of the limbic system, it produces the tameness, the taming of the animal. Apart from that, the signs of the affection. So these are all associated with the limbic system. Okay, so for example, stimulation of the cat's amygdala, it will produce the behavioral pattern called as rage. That means the cat, it will extend its claws, raise the tail, open its eyes wide, hisses and spits out. So this characteristic emotions which are produced, that is referred to as rage. And on the contrary, removal of the amygdala, it will produce the lack of fear and aggression. So there won't be any fear or aggression. So supposing if the amygdala in a particular person is damaged, so the person will fail to recognize the fearful situation. So fearful expressions will not be given by that particular person, or will not be able to express the fear in such situation. Okay. Now together with the cerebrum, the limbic system also functions in the memory. Okay, so damage to the limbic system may result in memory impairment. Apart from that, the hippocampus, which is a part of the limbic system, that's unique in that the capability of mitosis, it is retained by this particular part. Remember, I had told you all that the central nervous system, it does not have the neurons present in the central nervous system, they cannot regenerate. But this particular part, hippocampus, it has a capability of mitosis, undergoing mitosis. So some of the part of this particular brain which can get damaged, it can be regenerated. So memory, it can be developed, okay, by regenerating new neurons, even in the elderlies also, because of this particular capability of undergoing mitosis of the hippocampus. Okay. So this to do with the functions of limbic system. So we have considered the various aspects of the cerebrum. So it comprises of the three main areas: the cerebral cortex, which forms the outermost layer, and it is actually the grey matter. Within that lies the white matter, which comprises of a number of tracts for communication between the higher centers, that is cerebral cortex, and the lower areas. And within the white matters are located several nuclei. So we have seen basal nuclei and the limbic system, which are present within this white matter, which mainly is associated with the memory or mainly the emotions. Okay, so mainly the outer part, that is the cerebral cortex, it is mainly associated with most of the integrative functions. So we will be considering the functional organization of this cerebrum in the next video, okay, where we'll be discussing about the different areas into which the integration of different functions or the different inputs from the bodies, it will take place. Okay, so that's the reference. Thank you for watching.